Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1. Born from pilgrimage and peril, the quiet origins of the Knights Templar. You begin this story not with knights or battles or secret symbols, but with roads. Long, dusty roads that stretch across Europe and into lands most people you know will never see. In the early 12th century, these roads are crowded with pilgrims. They walk slowly, carrying little more than food, prayer books, and the weight of expectation. Their goal is Jerusalem. Their danger is everything in between. After the First Crusade captured Jerusalem in 1099, Christian Europe experienced a surge of pilgrimage. The city was, for the moment, under Latin Christian control, and word spread quickly that the holy places were open again. For ordinary people, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. To pray at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was believed to cleanse sins, shorten time in purgatory, and offer a kind of spiritual closure that daily village life could not provide. You can imagine the excitement mixed with fear, because reaching Jerusalem required crossing territories filled with bandits, unstable politics, unfamiliar languages, and limited protection. Pilgrimage was not glamorous. You walked. You slept in barns, open fields, or crude shelters. Food spoiled. Shoes wore thin. Illness spread easily. Many pilgrims were elderly, poor, or physically unprepared. Some never returned. Contemporary chronicles mention bodies left by roadsides, stripped of valuables, sometimes unburied. These were not heroic deaths. They were quiet endings, barely noticed by history. The newly formed Crusader states Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa were fragile. They had few soldiers, long borders, and constant threats from neighboring Muslim powers. Their rulers focused on holding cities and castles, not on guarding every road. So pilgrims remained exposed, especially along the route from the port city of Jaffa to Jerusalem, a stretch of land notorious for ambushes. It is here, in this practical problem, that the Knights Templar begin not as a grand vision, but as a response to exhaustion and fear. Around 1119, a small group of knights led by Hugh of Payens, a minor noble from Champagne, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. Their proposal was simple. They would dedicate their lives to protecting pilgrims on the roads. They would not seek wealth. They would not hold lands for themselves. They would live as monks but fight as knights. This was an unusual idea. At the time, monks prayed and withdrew from the world. Knights fought, killed, and accumulated land. Combining the two roles challenged long-standing Christian ideas about violence and holiness. Yet the need was obvious. Baldwin II, ruling a kingdom constantly on the edge of collapse, gave them permission to operate. The group was small, likely no more than 9 knights at first. They had no distinctive uniform, no formal name. They lived simply, supported by donations and the goodwill of local rulers. Baldwin housed them near the Temple Mount, in part of the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, which Crusaders believed stood on the ruins of Solomon's Temple. From this location, they would later derive their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. For now, though, they were just men with horses, worn armor, and a narrow purpose. Their daily life was repetitive and restrained. You wake before dawn, you pray, you eat sparingly, you patrol roads that look the same day after day, dust settles on your cloak, conversations are brief, silence is encouraged. When pilgrims pass, you escort them quietly, scanning hills and tree lines for movement. Most days, nothing happens. That boredom is part of the job. And then sometimes, violence arrives suddenly. Ambushes are fast. Bandits know the terrain. They strike where escape is difficult. The Templars' presence likely discouraged many attacks, but not all. When fights occurred, they were brutal and inefficient. There were no grand formations, no speeches, just confusion, shouting, and the sharp panic of survival. Some knights died. Their names were rarely recorded. What is striking is how little attention this group received at first. For nearly a decade, they existed in obscurity. No major chronicler focused on them. No papal decree defined them. They survived on donations from sympathetic nobles, often given quietly. Their vow of poverty was real. Early descriptions emphasize their lack of resources, two knights sometimes sharing a single horse, a detail later immortalized in their seal. That image is revealing. It suggests not symbolic humility but actual scarcity. Horses were expensive. Armor was expensive. Food, stable space, and maintenance required constant support. Without recognition from the church, the group was vulnerable to collapse. Many similar religious movements had appeared and disappeared during this period. What changed their fate was not a battle, but a meeting. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes in France, Hugh of Payens presented the Templars to the wider church. He had allies now, including Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential religious figures of the age. Bernard argued that the Templars represented a new kind of holiness, men who fought not for personal glory, but for defense of others. Killing, in this context, was framed as regrettable but necessary. The council approved the order. They were given an official rule inspired by Cistercian monastic practices. Poverty, chastity, obedience, these were now binding vows. The Templars were recognized as a legitimate religious order. For you imagining life at this moment, the change is subtle but powerful. Donations increase. Letters arrive from Europe offering land, money, or equipment. New recruits join, some young and idealistic, others older and seeking redemption for past violence. The one small brotherhood begins to grow. Yet growth brings questions. How does an order sworn to poverty manage increasing wealth? How does a monk trained for silence adjust to command? And how does an organization created to guard roads adapt when its responsibilities expand far beyond them? As the Templars stand at this threshold, no longer obscure, not yet powerful, their future remains uncertain. Will this careful balance between faith and force hold, or will it begin to strain under the weight of expectation and expansion? When you return to the roads of the Holy Land after the Council of Troyes, something has shifted quietly, almost invisibly but permanently. The dust is the same. The danger is the same. Yet the men riding beside you now wear a clearer sense of purpose, reinforced by something they did not previously possess: legitimacy. Recognition by the church changes the Knights Templar in ways that are not immediately dramatic but deeply structural. You feel it first in routine. The rule approved at Troyes governs nearly every detail of daily life. When you wake, when you eat, how you dress, how you speak. Silence is formalized. Laughter is discouraged. Personal possessions are forbidden. Even your clothing, now a white mantle, symbolizing purity, is regulated in length and simplicity. Nothing is meant to stand out. This rigid structure is not designed for comfort. It is designed for control, stability, and uniformity. You are no longer simply a knight choosing to protect pilgrims. You are part of an institution that expects you to submit completely. Obedience is not abstract. It is immediate and practical. Orders are followed without debate. Hesitation is treated as a flaw. What makes this unusual is that the Templars answer not to local bishops or kings, but directly to the Pope. This exemption is granted gradually, through papal bulls over the following decades, but even early on, the direction is clear. The order is meant to exist slightly outside normal feudal structures. For a medieval society built on layered obligations, this is quietly revolutionary. As donations begin to arrive from Europe, they are not handed to individual knights. They are given to the order itself. Land grants come with villages, fields, mills, and peasants attached. These properties are often far from Jerusalem in France, England, the Iberian Peninsula. You may never see them, but their produce, rents, and income help sustain you. This creates an unusual situation. You have vowed poverty, yet you serve an organization that is steadily accumulating wealth. Personally, your life remains austere. You eat simple meals, bread, vegetables, occasional meat. You sleep communally. Your armor is functional, not ornate. But institutionally, the order is becoming something much larger than its original mission. Administration becomes necessary. Records are kept. Messengers travel between Templar houses. Commanderies' regional headquarters are established across Europe. Each one manages resources, recruits new brothers, and sends funds eastward. This is slow, careful work. There is nothing glamorous about balancing grain yields or negotiating rents, but it keeps the roads guarded and the castles supplied. And the castles are increasing. As the Templars gain trust, they are given responsibility for fortifications. Some are modest stone towers guarding mountain passes or river crossings. Others grow into massive structures like Safed or La Roche-Guillaume. You might be assigned to one for years, performing repetitive duties: maintenance, drills, patrols, prayer. Days blur together. The threat of attack is constant, but actual combat is rare. Most of your time is spent waiting. Waiting defines much of a Templar's life. You wait for supplies, you wait for orders, you wait for news from Europe, you wait for enemies who may or may not come. This waiting shapes the mindset of the order. Discipline becomes internalized. Emotion is restrained. Personal ambition has little space to grow. Yet not all brothers are the same. The order includes knight brothers who fight, sergeants who support and sometimes fight, chaplains who handle spiritual matters, and a wide range of laborers and associates. Many people living on Templar lands are not members at all. They are farmers, craftsmen, servants, ordinary people whose lives are shaped by Templar management. Their days are not filled with vows or crusading ideals, but with harvests, taxes, and obligations. For them, the Templars are landlords, often efficient, sometimes harsh, generally predictable. That predictability matters. In a world of arbitrary feudal demands, the order's standardized rules can feel almost modern. Rents are fixed, obligations are recorded, justice, while firm, is usually consistent. Back in the Holy Land, the Templars' military role expands slowly. They are not an army in the modern sense. They are a standing force, trained, equipped, and permanently present. Kings and nobles come and go. The Templars remain. This continuity makes them valuable, but also places them in a delicate position. They must cooperate with secular leaders while remaining independent from them. You might find yourself escorting a caravan one month and reinforcing a border fortress the next. The work is practical, not heroic. The order's reputation for fearlessness grows less from dramatic victories and more from reliability. Templars do not retreat easily. They are trained to hold position, even when outnumbered. This earns respect, but also casualties. Death is handled with minimal ceremony. There is prayer, but little indulgence in grief. Replacement is expected. The order's strength lies in its structure, not in individual lives. This philosophy is comforting to some and unsettling to others. As years pass, the original purpose, protecting pilgrims, begins to feel almost secondary. Pilgrimage continues, but the political landscape is shifting. Muslim powers are reorganizing. Leaders like Zengi and later Saladin begin to unify territories that had once been fragmented. The Crusader states grow more defensive. Castles become more important than roads. The Templars adapt because they must. They garrison fortresses. They participate in battles planned by others. Sometimes they advise restraint. Sometimes they push for aggression. Their collective experience gives them influence, even when they lack formal authority. And influence is dangerous. In Europe, stories circulate. Some are admiring, others are suspicious. How does an order sworn to poverty manage so much land? Why do they answer only to the Pope? What happens behind their closed doors? These questions do not yet have sharp edges, but they linger. For now, the Templars remain focused on survival of pilgrims, of castles, of the fragile Christian presence in the East. Their days are still filled with long stretches of monotony punctuated by moments of violence. Their nights are quiet, structured by prayer and watch rotations. Yet beneath this routine, something larger is forming. An organization that began as a response to a single dangerous road is becoming a permanent institution, woven into the political, economic, and military fabric of medieval Europe and the Holy Land. The question that remains unspoken but increasingly unavoidable is whether such an institution can remain purely functional, or whether its growing power will eventually demand a reckoning of its own. By the time you reach the later decades of the 12th century, the Knights Templar no longer feel like an experiment. They feel permanent. That sense of permanence settles into daily life in small, almost forgettable ways. The morning prayers are always said in the same order. The horses are groomed the same way. The watch is changed at the same hours. Stability becomes the order's greatest strength and quietly its greatest risk. You are no longer guarding only pilgrims. In fact, on many days you may not see a pilgrim at all. Instead, you are stationed at a fortress whose name rarely appears in chronicles. You inspect walls. You oversee storage rooms. You count grain and water, knowing that siege is always a possibility. These tasks are repetitive and dull, but they determine whether hundreds live or starve if fighting comes. The Templars' identity shifts almost without ceremony. What began as a protective brotherhood becomes a professional military religious institution. You train constantly, not for glory but for coordination. The emphasis is on holding formation, obeying commands, and accepting loss without collapse. This discipline is admired by allies and feared by enemies, but it also strips individuality away. You are not meant to improvise heroics. You are meant to endure. Endurance shapes the order's reputation more than victory ever could. When battles occur, and they do occur more frequently as the political balance shifts, they are rarely decisive. Skirmishes over wells, raids on supply lines, failed sieges, temporary truces. The Templars participate in all of them, often absorbing the worst losses because they are expected to stand firm while others withdraw. Chroniclers praise their bravery, but bravery in this context often means dying where you are told to stand. This expectation is reinforced by the rule: retreat without orders is forbidden, surrender is discouraged. The logic is simple: the order's value lies in reliability. If you are known to break, the system fails. This mindset produces courage, but it also produces rigidity. Flexibility, which might save lives, is sometimes sacrificed for principle. At the same time, the Templars' administrative side continues to grow. In Europe, commanderies become fixtures of local life. You may never visit them, but they shape the order's future more than the battlefields do. They manage estates, resolve disputes, and move money across borders. For donors, this efficiency is reassuring. Giving to the Templars feels safe. Their records are thorough. Their representatives are disciplined and consistent. This trust has consequences. People begin to use the Templars not only as warriors, but as custodians. Money is deposited with them for safekeeping during pilgrimages. Documents are entrusted to their care. They become intermediaries in transactions that require reliability across distance. None of this is planned as a financial revolution. It grows out of necessity and reputation, but it changes how the order is perceived. You, living under vows of poverty, may feel detached from this. Your meals are still plain. Your clothing is still regulated. You own nothing personally. Yet you cannot help noticing that the order now operates on a scale far beyond its original purpose. Decisions made in distant European houses affect your supplies, your reinforcements, your survival. With scale comes distance distant from the original problem of pilgrims being attacked on lonely roads. Those roads still exist. They are still dangerous, but the order's attention is divided. Resources are finite. Castles demand men. Borders demand patrols. Political alliances require presence. The simplicity of the early mission is gone, replaced by a web of obligations that must be managed carefully to avoid collapse. And collapse always feels close. The Crusader states are under constant pressure. Victories are temporary. Losses accumulate. When strong leaders arise among Muslim forces, coordination improves and the balance tilts. The Templars respond as they always have, by holding ground, reinforcing fortifications, and trusting in discipline. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What becomes clear over time is that the order is no longer just reacting to events. It is shaping them. Its decisions influence where armies move, where supplies are stored, which alliances are strengthened or weakened. This influence is informal but real. Kings listen to Templar commanders because they have institutional memory, something few others possess. Institutional memory is a quiet power. You remember past failures, past betrayals, past shortages. This memory informs caution, but it can also foster suspicion. The order becomes careful about whom it trusts, slow to change established practices. Innovation is risky. Tradition feels safer. In this environment, criticism begins to surface, not loudly, not yet, but persistently. Some nobles resent the order's exemptions from taxes and local authority. Some clergy question the moral logic of monk warriors accumulating wealth. Others simply envy the stability and reach the Templars have achieved in a world where most institutions are fragile. For now, these tensions remain manageable. The Pope continues to support the order. Donations continue to flow. Recruitment remains steady. From the inside, life feels controlled, predictable, even dull. You are doing what you were trained to do day after day. But history is rarely undone by sudden catastrophe alone. More often, it is shaped by slow accumulation of habits, of assumptions, of unresolved contradictions. The central contradiction of the Templars is already visible, even if it is not yet acknowledged. An order sworn to poverty operating immense wealth. An order devoted to protection increasingly entangled in power. An order built for a specific problem, adapting to a world where that problem is changing. You might sense this only faintly in moments of quiet reflection. During night watch, when the horizon is still. During prayer, when the words repeat themselves and meaning feels distant. During the long wait between conflicts, when purpose feels less immediate than it once did. The Knights Templar will endure for nearly 2 centuries after these early days. Their rise, their power, and their eventual fall will be shaped by forces far beyond the dangerous road to Jerusalem where they began. Yet everything that follows is rooted here, in these early choices, practical, restrained, and deeply human. The question that lingers is not whether the Templars succeeded in their original mission. In many ways, they did. The question is whether any institution can grow beyond its founding purpose without being reshaped and ultimately judged by the power it accumulates along the way. How different might history have been if the order had remained small, focused, and temporary? Or was its transformation inevitable from the moment it chose permanence over simplicity? Story 2. Monks with Swords. Daily life inside the Templar Order. When you step inside the daily life of a Knight Templar, what you notice first is not the armor, the horses, or even the weapons. It is the schedule. Life in the order is governed by time divided into precise, repetitive segments. Bells mark the hours. Prayers interrupt work. Work interrupts rest. Rest is never complete. From the outside, the Templars may look like warriors, but from within, they live as monks whose days are structured less by battle than by routine. You wake before dawn. The dormitory is quiet, filled with the shallow breathing of men accustomed to sleeping lightly. There are no private rooms. Privacy itself is considered a temptation. You rise when ordered, dress quickly, and move to prayer. There is no lingering, no conversation. The rule emphasizes silence, especially in the morning, when thoughts are believed to wander most easily toward pride or desire. Prayer is not emotional. It is repetitive and restrained. The words are familiar, spoken in unison, designed to steady the mind rather than excite it. You kneel, stand, kneel again. Your body learns the rhythm even when your attention drifts. This is considered normal. Discipline, not inspiration, is the goal. After prayer comes the first practical tasks of the day. Horses must be fed and checked, armor inspected, weapons cleaned. These are not glamorous activities, but they are constant. A neglected strap or cracked shield could mean death later. The rule treats carelessness not as a mistake, but as a moral failing. Everything you maintain reflects your obedience. Meals are communal and deliberately plain. You eat what is provided, not what you prefer. Meat is limited. Wine is watered down. You eat in silence while a brother reads aloud from scripture or religious commentary. This reading continues whether you are hungry or not, whether the passage is interesting or dull. The purpose is not education alone, but the suppression of idle talk. Conversation is controlled even outside meals. Laughter is discouraged. Complaints are frowned upon. Excessive speech is considered dangerous, a gateway to conflict and ego. If you must speak, you do so briefly and quietly. Over time, many brothers develop a habit of internalizing thoughts rather than expressing them. This silence creates a particular atmosphere. You become aware of small sounds: the creak of leather, the scrape of boots on stone, the wind moving through courtyards. The world feels narrower, more contained. For some, this is comforting. For others, it is suffocating. Not every Templar is a knight. Within the order, strict hierarchies exist. Knight brothers are usually drawn from the lower nobility. They fight on horseback and wear the white mantle. Sergeants, often from humbler backgrounds, perform a wide range of duties: infantry fighting, logistics, administration. They wear darker clothing. Chaplains handle spiritual matters, hearing confessions and conducting services. There are also servants and laborers who are not full members of the order but live under its authority. Each role has its own rules, but all are subject to discipline. Punishments are practical and public: eating on the floor, losing a mantle temporarily, reduced rations. Severe offenses can lead to imprisonment within the order or expulsion. There is little room for appeal. Obedience is expected, not negotiated. Personal possessions are forbidden. You do not own money. You do not own weapons. Even your horse belongs to the order. This removes many sources of jealousy and competition, but it also removes autonomy. If something is taken from you, there is no personal recourse. You accept it as part of your vow. Cleanliness is regulated. Bathing is limited, partly for humility, partly due to prevailing medical beliefs. Clothing is inspected to ensure simplicity. Vanity is treated as a serious danger. You are meant to blend in, not stand out. Individual identity is slowly replaced by collective identity. Training occurs regularly but without spectacle. There are drills, formation practice, and instruction in discipline under pressure. The goal is not brilliance but reliability. You are trained to respond automatically to commands, to hold formation even when afraid, to trust the structure around you. Fear is acknowledged but not indulged. When patrols are assigned, they are methodical. Routes are known, distances calculated, supplies accounted for. You ride in silence, alert to terrain and movement. Most patrols end without incident. This repetition dulls the senses, which is why discipline is emphasized so heavily. Complacency is more dangerous than fear. In quieter periods, brothers are assigned to maintenance and administration. Walls need repair, roofs leak, records must be copied, grain counted. These tasks are monotonous, but they occupy much of your life. The image of constant warfare is misleading. Most days are defined by work that looks more like estate management than crusading. Illness is common. Medical knowledge is limited. Wounds fester, fevers spread. Care is basic rest, prayer, herbal remedies. Death from sickness is as common as death from battle. When a brother dies, the response is restrained. There is prayer, burial, and redistribution of duties. Grief is private if it exists at all. What holds this life together is not enthusiasm, but habit. Over time, the rule becomes internalized. You no longer question why you rise at a certain hour or eat a certain way. The structure becomes your identity. This can be deeply stabilizing. especially for men who came from violent or chaotic backgrounds. The order offers certainty in a world where little is certain. Yet certainty comes at a cost. Some brothers struggle with the suppression of individuality. Others wrestle with doubts about violence, about purpose, about whether the life they lead truly aligns with the ideals they were promised. These doubts are rarely voiced. The culture does not reward introspection that leads to questioning authority. From the outside, the Templars appear unified and impenetrable. From within, unity is maintained through constant reinforcement rules, repetition, and the quiet pressure to conform. As you move through this life day after day, it becomes clear that the true strength of the order is not its weapons or its wealth, but its ability to shape human behavior over time. The Templars create men who function predictably under stress, who accept loss without protest, who place the institution above themselves. The unresolved question is whether this shaping produces resilience, or whether it slowly erodes the very humanity the order claims to protect. As the Templars, responsibilities expand and the pressures on them increase. How will this tightly controlled inner life hold up against fear, ambition, and the weight of expectation placed upon them? As days turn into years, you begin to understand that life in the Templar order is not difficult because it is harsh, but because it is unchanging. The routines that once felt grounding now press in from all sides. The bells still ring. The prayers still repeat. The work still needs doing. And yet, the longer you remain, the more effort it takes to surrender yourself to the pattern without resistance. Obedience, in theory, is simple. You follow orders. You trust your superiors. You suppress personal judgment when it conflicts with command. In practice, obedience is tested most often not in moments of battle, but in moments of ambiguity when instructions are unclear, when resources are scarce, or when you believe a decision may lead to unnecessary loss. The rule offers guidance but not answers to every situation. When two values conflict, mercy and discipline, caution and courage, you are expected to defer to authority. This creates internal tension that rarely finds expression. Doubt is treated as a private burden, not a communal one. Superiors are chosen for experience and loyalty, but they are still human. Some lead with calm competence. Others rely heavily on strict enforcement of rules. Favoritism, though officially condemned, exists quietly. Brothers notice who is trusted, who is overlooked, who is punished more harshly than others. These observations are rarely spoken, but they accumulate in silence. Silence itself becomes a form of strain. Because conversation is limited, misunderstandings linger. Resentments go unresolved. A careless remark or perceived slight can echo for months without confrontation. The order believes silence prevents conflict, and often it does, but it also prevents reconciliation. Emotional distance becomes the norm. In times of external pressure, this emotional restraint is tested. During extended periods of heightened military threat, watches are longer, sleep is shorter, anxiety rises. The familiar structure remains, but the margin for error narrows. Fatigue sets in, mistakes happen. When a mistake occurs, missed signals, faulty equipment, misjudged terrain, the consequences can be fatal. The order's response is rarely emotional. Investigations are conducted. Responsibility is assigned. Punishments, if necessary, are administered. There is little room for forgiveness as a concept separate from discipline. Mercy is expressed through consistency, not leniency. For many brothers, this predictability is reassuring. You know what is expected. You know the cost of failure. In a violent world, clarity has value. But for others, the lack of compassion feels increasingly heavy. The rule does not adapt easily to individual circumstance. Age changes your relationship to the order. When you are young, discipline feels like structure. As you grow older, injuries linger longer. Fatigue accumulates. You may no longer ride as quickly or fight as effectively, yet expectations do not soften. There is no formal retirement. You serve as long as you are physically able. When you are no longer able, your role shifts quietly, more supervision, less action, but your identity remains tied to obedience. Illness exposes vulnerability most clearly. A sick brother is cared for, but care is limited by resources and belief. Pain is endured, not analyzed. Recovery is uncertain. Death is accepted as a natural outcome, not a failure of the system. Through all of this, prayer continues to anchor the day. Yet prayer itself changes over time. Early enthusiasm fades into habit. The words become familiar to the point of abstraction. Some brothers find comfort in this repetition. Others struggle with a sense of spiritual dryness, a feeling that faith has become mechanical. The order does not provide tools to address this directly. Doubt is not nurtured. Spiritual struggle is acknowledged only insofar as it can be resolved through increased discipline. Pray more. Work harder. Speak less. These are the standard remedies. Despite this, bonds do form. Shared hardship creates quiet loyalty. You trust the men beside you because you have watched them endure the same restrictions, the same dangers, the same losses. This trust is not emotional in the modern sense, but practical. You know they will hold position. You know they will follow orders. You know they will not abandon you. This reliability is the foundation of the order's effectiveness. It is also what allows individuals to disappear into the collective. Names matter less than roles. Replacement is expected. Continuity is prized above all else. From the outside, this looks like strength. From within, it feels like endurance. As the order grows larger and more complex, layers of command multiply. Decisions are made farther away from the people affected by them. Messages travel slowly. Context is lost. You may carry out an order without fully understanding why it was given. Questioning it is technically possible but practically discouraged. This distance between decision and consequence introduces strain that the early order did not face. When there were only a handful of knights guarding a road, accountability was immediate. Now, accountability is institutional. Some brothers adapt easily. They find meaning in submission, in being part of something that will outlast them. Others struggle quietly. A few leave the order, though departure is rare and socially costly. Most remain, bound by vows, habit, and the absence of alternatives. What is rarely acknowledged is how much the order depends on this endurance. The Templars function because most men do not break under monotony, fear, or suppression. The system assumes resilience and enforces it through structure. Yet systems built on endurance alone are vulnerable when circumstances change faster than habits can adapt. As external pressures mount, political tension, military setbacks, rising suspicion from allies and rivals alike, the internal life of the order is asked to carry more weight. Discipline must compensate for uncertainty. Obedience must absorb fear. The question that begins to suggest itself, though never openly asked, is whether the very discipline that sustains the Templars might also limit their ability to respond to a world that no longer fits the assumptions under which the order was formed. When obedience becomes survival, what happens when survival demands change? By the time you reach the later years of life within the Templar order, the question is no longer whether you belong. Belonging is assumed. The question is what remains of you outside that belonging. From the moment you took your vows, the order began shaping not only your actions, but your sense of self. At first, this felt purposeful. You were becoming something disciplined, meaningful, and necessary. Over time, however, the boundaries between who you are and what the order requires grow increasingly difficult to distinguish. You do not mark time by birthdays or anniversaries. You mark it by postings, commanders, and campaigns. Memory organizes itself around places, castles, commanderies, stretches of road rather than personal milestones. Your past life fades quietly. Family ties weaken. Letters, if they arrive at all, are brief and filtered through layers of formality. The rule discourages nostalgia. Dwelling on the past is seen as distraction. You are meant to live entirely in the present structure of duty. This produces focus, but it also produces loss. Not dramatic loss, there is no single moment of rupture but a gradual thinning of personal memory. For many brothers, this is acceptable. The medieval world offers few stable identities. To be part of something enduring is rare and valuable. The order gives you food, shelter, purpose, and a role that is understood by others. You are not adrift, you are defined. Yet definition has a cost. There is no clear boundary between service and self-erasure. Individual preferences, how you pray, how you think about violence, how you understand faith are expected to align with institutional norms. Differences are tolerated only insofar as they remain invisible. Over time, many brothers stop noticing the absence of choice. The absence becomes normal. When moments of crisis arise, this normalization is tested. In battle, you are expected to suppress instinct. Fear is not eliminated but overridden. You act because you are trained to act, not because you choose to in that moment. Afterward, there is no structured reflection. Victory and defeat are both absorbed into routine. Losses are recorded, replacements assigned, prayers said. Life continues. This approach prevents paralysis, but it also prevents processing. Trauma, though not named as such, accumulates quietly. Nightmares go unspoken. Memories are buried under repetition. The order does not provide language for these experiences, only structure to move past them. Aging intensifies this silence. As your body weakens, you become more aware of time passing, even if the order does not acknowledge it. Younger brothers arrive, unfamiliar with earlier struggles, trained under slightly different conditions. You are respected for your experience but not indulged. Advice is given when asked, not volunteered. Authority flows downward, not sideways. There is dignity in this restraint, but also isolation. Spiritual life follows a similar pattern. Faith remains central, but it is mediated almost entirely through rule and ritual. Personal interpretation is secondary. For some, this is freeing. Doubt is carried by the institution rather than the individual. For others, it becomes hollow. Prayer feels more like maintenance than connection. Yet even in this hollowness, many remain loyal. Loyalty in the order is not emotional enthusiasm. It is endurance. You stay because leaving would mean unraveling the structure that has held your life together. Outside the order, there is uncertainty. Inside, there is predictability, even if it is austere. This predictability is what allows the Templars to function across generations. Individual dissatisfaction does not destabilize the system. The order absorbs it, but absorption is not transformation. Tensions remain unresolved, stored within routines rather than addressed directly. As the broader world begins to shift politically, militarily, culturally, the order's internal life changes very little. This consistency is often praised. It is seen as moral strength, but it also means that adaptation happens slowly, if at all. What you experience as a brother is stability. What the world may eventually perceive is inflexibility. By the end of your service, if you live that long, you may not feel triumphant or disillusioned. You may simply feel used to it. The life has become normal. The restrictions no longer feel restrictive because alternatives are unimaginable. This is the quiet power of institutions. They do not need to convince you forever. They only need to shape your habits long enough that questioning them feels unnecessary. From the outside, the Templars are still admired for discipline, unity, and purpose. From within, life continues much as it always has, structured, restrained, and largely unremarked upon. And that may be the most telling detail of all. The Order's greatest achievement is not battlefield success or wealth accumulation, but the creation of a human system capable of sustaining itself through repetition, obedience, and the gradual replacement of individuals. It is effective, it is durable, and it is deeply human in both its strengths and its blind spots. As pressures from outside the order increase in the years to come, political suspicion, economic envy, shifting religious priorities, the internal life you have lived will be tested not for its discipline, but for its ability to respond to judgment and change. The question that remains is whether an identity built on endurance and obedience can withstand a world that begins to demand explanation, accountability, and flexibility, or whether the very qualities that sustain the Knights Templar will, one day, make them unable to defend themselves at all. Story 3. The Roads to Jerusalem, Protecting Pilgrims in a Violent World. You begin this story on foot. Most pilgrims do. Horses are expensive, and ships, though faster, are dangerous in their own way. So you walk step after step across terrain that grows less familiar the farther you travel from home. The road to Jerusalem is not a single path, but a patchwork of routes stitched together by rumor, tradition, and necessity. Some segments are ancient Roman roads, cracked and uneven. Others are little more than dirt tracks worn into the earth by generations of travelers. Pilgrimage in the 12th century is not an adventure. It is an act of endurance. You carry what you can: a staff, a small bag, perhaps a relic or token blessed by a local priest. Food must be purchased along the way or begged for. Water is never guaranteed. Shoes wear thin. Blisters become infected. Many pilgrims are older, motivated by a sense that this journey may be their last chance at spiritual resolution. Others are young, sent by families or fulfilling vows made in desperation. The danger begins long before you reach the Holy Land. Banditry is common across Europe, but it intensifies in border regions and contested territories. Pilgrims are easy targets. They travel in groups, but those groups are poorly armed. Their valuables are modest but predictable. A stolen purse, a knife, even shoes can be resold or reused. Violence does not need to be extreme to be effective. A single threat is often enough. As you move closer to the Eastern Mediterranean, the risks multiply. Languages change. Local customs are unfamiliar. Hospitality depends on shifting alliances and individual goodwill. In some areas, pilgrims are tolerated. In others, they are resented or exploited. Guides are hired, sometimes honestly, sometimes not. Wrong turns can lead into isolated valleys or poorly patrolled roads. When you finally reach a port like Acre or Jaffa, you might expect relief. Instead, danger sharpens. Ships arrive irregularly. Crowds gather. Supplies run low. Disease spreads easily in cramped quarters. From Jaffa to Jerusalem, the final leg of the journey is short in distance but infamous in reputation. This road cuts through dry hills and narrow passes. There is little cover but also little protection. Local raiders know where pilgrims must pass. Attacks are sudden. Victims are stripped, beaten, sometimes killed. Chroniclers record these incidents briefly as if they are expected. Names are rarely given. The deaths blend into the background of holy travel. It is here that the Knights Templar enter your awareness not as legendary warriors, but as a practical presence. You first notice them by their orderliness. They ride in formation. They do not shout. Their armor is functional, worn, and largely unadorned. When they escort pilgrims, they do so methodically. They position themselves at the front, rear, and flanks. They watch ridgelines. They do not engage in conversation unless necessary. For pilgrims, this presence changes the tone of the journey. Fear does not disappear, but it becomes contained. You walk knowing that someone is watching the terrain while you focus on putting one foot in front of the other. That division of labor-faith for you, vigilance for them, is the quiet logic behind the Templars' original mission. The Knights do not romanticize this work. Escorting pilgrims is repetitive and exhausting. The same roads, the same threats, the same outcomes. Most journeys pass without incident, which means most days feel uneventful. But uneventful days are the goal. Success is measured by absence of attack, of loss, of chaos. When violence does occur, it is swift. Bandits test the escort first. They watch from a distance. If the Templars appear alert and numerous, attackers often withdraw. If they sense weakness, fatigue, thin numbers, poor positioning, they strike quickly. These engagements are chaotic. There are no battle lines, only short bursts of fighting meant to overwhelm before help can arrive. The Templars are trained for this kind of conflict. They do not chase fleeing attackers far. Their priority is containment, not revenge. Protect the pilgrims. Regroup. Move on. This restraint frustrates some allies, but it reflects the Order's practical mindset. The road must be passable tomorrow, not avenged today. For pilgrims, the aftermath is sobering. Injured travelers are tended to as best as possible. The dead are buried quickly if time and safety allow. There is prayer but little ceremony. The journey continues. Delays are dangerous. Standing still invites further attack. What is rarely discussed is how limited the Templars' reach actually is. They cannot guard every road. They cannot escort every group. Their numbers are small relative to the volume of pilgrims. Choices must be made about which routes receive protection and when. These decisions are influenced by season, political conditions, and available manpower. Some pilgrims still travel unescorted, either by choice or necessity. For them, the road remains as dangerous as ever. Even under protection, hardship defines the experience. Heat during the day, cold at night, hunger, dehydration, fear of illness. Faith is tested not by theology but by discomfort. Many pilgrims arrive in Jerusalem exhausted, disillusioned, or physically broken. Some die shortly after arrival, having reached their destination only to collapse. The Templars witness this repeatedly. Their role places them at the intersection of idealism and reality. They see the faith that drives people forward and the fragility that nearly undoes them. This shapes the Order's worldview. Protection is not abstract. It is immediate and bodily. Over time, the roads themselves change. As escorts become more common, some routes grow safer. Merchants begin to use them. Small settlements appear along the way, offering food, water, and shelter. This creates a fragile economy dependent on continued security. When protection lapses, these settlements suffer quickly. Thus, guarding pilgrims becomes more than a religious service. It becomes a stabilizing force in a volatile region. The Templars are not building cities, but they are enabling movement, and movement shapes history quietly and persistently. Yet this role also exposes the Order to criticism. Some accuse the Templars of favoring certain pilgrims over others, those who can pay, those backed by influential patrons. Officially, protection is offered without charge, but donations often follow. The line between gift and expectation blurs. Resentment grows among those left unprotected. Others argue that escorting pilgrims encourages unnecessary risk, that people undertake dangerous journeys because they believe they will be protected. This criticism surfaces occasionally, then fades, unresolved. For the Templars, the work continues regardless. Roads do not grow safer on their own. Someone must ride them. Someone must watch. As you approach Jerusalem at the end of the journey, the city rises slowly into view. For pilgrims, this is the culmination of months or years of hardship. For the Templars, it is the end of one escort and the beginning of preparation for the next. There is no celebration, no pause for reflection. The road behind you still needs guarding. And the question that lingers quiet but persistent is how long this fragile system of protection can hold as pilgrimages increase, political tensions rise, and the dangers along the road adapt to the presence of armed escorts. Can vigilance alone keep faith moving safely through a world shaped by violence? Or will the roads to Jerusalem always demand a price that protection can only partially reduce? Once you have walked the road under Templar protection for some time, you begin to notice that safety is not a condition, it is a process. It must be renewed every day, recalculated with each journey, renegotiated with every shift in weather, politics, and manpower. Protection is never complete. It is only sufficient and only for the moment. For the Knights Templar, escorting pilgrims is not simply a matter of riding alongside them. It requires planning that begins long before anyone sets foot on the road. Routes are chosen carefully, not only for distance but for visibility, water access, and historical patterns of attack. Seasonal changes matter. In summer, heat and thirst weaken travelers. In winter, mud slows movement and isolates groups. Each condition creates different risks. You may not notice this planning as a pilgrim. From your perspective, the road simply unfolds ahead of you. But behind that simplicity is constant calculation. How many nights are available? How many pilgrims are expected? Are there reports of unrest in nearby villages? Has a truce expired? Has a local leader changed allegiance? Information travels slowly and imperfectly. Messengers arrive late. Rumors are unreliable. Decisions are often made with incomplete knowledge. The Templars compensate for this uncertainty with caution and routine. Better to arrive late than to be surprised. Better to take the longer road if it is more predictable. The escort itself is tightly organized. Pilgrims are grouped according to pace and condition. The sick and elderly are positioned near the center. Knights ride ahead to scout and behind to deter pursuit. The formation is adjusted constantly, responding to terrain and visibility. Narrow passes compress the group. Open ground allows for wider spacing. You are expected to follow instructions even if you do not understand them. Stop here. Wait there. Drink now. Move quickly. These commands are not explained. Explanation takes time, and time creates vulnerability. Obedience, even from civilians, becomes part of the security strategy. Not all pilgrims comply easily. Some are impatient. Some distrust armed men. Some believe that faith alone should protect them. Others resent being told when to walk, rest, or drink. Tension arises, especially when exhaustion sets in. The Templars respond with firmness rather than persuasion. This can feel cold, but it is intentional. Familiarity breeds negotiation, and negotiation breeds delay. Delay is dangerous. Despite these precautions, the escorts cannot eliminate risk. Attackers adapt. They observe patterns. They learn which stretches of road are heavily guarded and which are not. They strike at dawn or dusk, when visibility is poor and fatigue is high. Sometimes they do not attack pilgrims at all, but the settlements that support them, raiding wells, stealing supplies, undermining the infrastructure that makes travel possible. In these cases, the Templars face difficult choices. Do they pursue attackers, leaving pilgrims exposed? Or do they continue forward, allowing local communities to suffer? There is no perfect answer. The Order's mandate prioritizes pilgrims, but the long-term safety of the road depends on local stability. Often, the decision is to continue moving. The road must remain open. This pragmatism saves lives in the short term, but it also breeds resentment. Local villagers may see the Templars as protectors of outsiders rather than defenders of the land itself. This perception complicates relationships and occasionally turns potential allies into quiet adversaries. Over time, the presence of escorts changes pilgrim behavior. Groups grow larger, assuming safety in numbers. Some travelers take risks they might otherwise avoid, relying on protection that may not be available when they need it. The sheer volume of pilgrims increases, straining the Templars' capacity. What began as a response to danger now contributes to it by encouraging movement through contested spaces. The Order is aware of this contradiction, but has little means to resolve it. Restricting pilgrimage would require authority it does not possess and would undermine its spiritual purpose. Expanding protection requires resources that are finite. The system stretches, but it does not break yet. For the knights themselves, the work becomes wearing. Escort duty is physically demanding and mentally draining. The constant vigilance leaves little room for rest. You are alert even when nothing happens, scanning the landscape for signs that may mean nothing. Over time, this sustained attention erodes energy and patience. Mistakes become more likely, even as the expectation of perfection remains. When an escort fails, when pilgrims are injured or killed, the response is restrained but severe. Investigations focus on procedure. Were formations maintained? Were scouts deployed correctly? Was the route appropriate? Responsibility is assigned not to fate but to decision-making. This reinforces discipline, but it also adds pressure. Failure is personal, even when circumstances are overwhelming. For pilgrims, the memory of these journeys lingers long after arrival. Some speak with gratitude of the silent nights who guarded them. Others remember fear, deprivation, and the sense of being herded through danger. Stories circulate in Europe, shaping the Templars' reputation as both protectors and enforcers. This mixed perception follows the order wherever it operates. As the years pass, escorting pilgrims becomes only one part of a broader security role. The roads are still important, but so are the fortresses that anchor them, the supply lines that sustain them, and the political agreements that allow them to exist at all. Protection expands from movement to territory. Yet the essence of the work remains the same, managing risk without ever eliminating it. You feel this most clearly at the end of an escort when pilgrims disperse into Jerusalem. Their journey has a conclusion. Yours does not. You return to preparation, cleaning equipment, tending horses, reviewing routes for the next group. There is no sense of completion, only continuation. The road is never finished. It is only temporarily secured. And as pilgrimages continue to grow, and as the political landscape around Jerusalem grows more volatile, the question becomes harder to ignore. How long can a system built on constant vigilance and limited manpower sustain the flow of faith-driven movement through a world that remains fundamentally hostile to it? When protection depends on endurance rather than resolution, what happens when endurance itself begins to falter? By the time you have seen the road guarded, threatened, repaired, and threatened again, you begin to understand that protection is not a shield. It is a thin layer of order laid carefully over a landscape that resists it. The Knights Templar never truly tame the road to Jerusalem. They only make it survivable often enough that people keep coming. This distinction matters. Every successful escort reinforces the belief that the journey is possible. Every arrival in Jerusalem confirms that faith, discipline, and endurance can overcome danger. Pilgrims tell their stories when they return home of fear, yes, but also of survival. They speak of white-cloaked knights who rode silently beside them, of watchful eyes on distant hills, of arriving alive. These stories circulate widely, encouraging others to attempt the same journey. The road becomes busier, not safer, busier. With increased traffic comes increased strain. Water sources are depleted more quickly. Small settlements struggle to support larger numbers. Disease spreads more easily among groups that must travel close together for protection. The very act of securing the road alters its ecology, social and physical alike. The Templars adapt as they always have, by refining routine. Escort schedules become more rigid. Departure times are fixed. Group sizes are regulated when possible. Rules for pilgrims grow stricter, not out of cruelty but necessity. Walk when told. Rest when allowed. Do not wander. Do not fall behind. These commands are enforced because deviation creates vulnerability not just for the individual but for the entire group. From the pilgrim's perspective, this can feel dehumanizing. The journey that was meant to be spiritual becomes mechanical. Reflection is interrupted by commands. Prayer competes with exhaustion and fear. Some resent the loss of autonomy, even as they depend on the protection it brings. From the Templars' perspective, this tension is unavoidable. You are responsible for lives that are not your own. You cannot afford to accommodate every personal need or belief. The road demands uniformity. Yet uniformity never fully succeeds. People stumble, tempers flare, illness strikes without warning. A single collapse can slow the group enough to invite danger. In these moments, decisions must be made quickly. Carry the sick forward or leave them behind with minimal escort. risk the group or sacrifice the individual. These are not moral dilemmas debated at length. They are resolved through precedent and command. The rule offers little comfort here. It emphasizes duty, not consolation. When loss occurs, and it does occur, the road absorbs it quietly. A shallow grave, a brief prayer. The journey continues. There is no time for mourning. The logic of movement overrides the logic of grief. This is one of the unspoken costs of pilgrimage under protection. Survival is prioritized over meaning. For the Templars, repeated exposure to this pattern reshapes their understanding of faith. Protection becomes their form of devotion. They do not meditate on holy places as pilgrims do. They experience holiness as prevention, the absence of disaster. Their spiritual success is measured by what does not happen. This makes their role difficult to recognize and easy to undervalue. When the road is quiet, their work appears unnecessary. When violence breaks through, their work appears insufficient. Rarely is it seen as exactly what it is, a fragile compromise between idealism and reality. Over time, political forces take greater interest in the roads. Control of movement means control of resources, information, and influence. The roads to Jerusalem are not only spiritual pathways, but economic ones. Merchants follow pilgrims. Messages travel with caravans. Alliances are strengthened or strained by who can move safely and who cannot. The Templars, by guarding these routes, become entangled in politics whether they intend to or not. Their presence signals authority. Their absence signals vulnerability. Local rulers take note. Some cooperate. Others resist quietly, undermining security through inaction or subtle hostility. This places the order in an increasingly complex position. They are protectors, but also symbols. Their decisions are interpreted beyond their immediate intent. Escorting one group and not another can be seen as favoritism. Choosing one route over another can alter local fortunes. None of this was part of the original mission. The knights who first guarded pilgrims likely imagined a finite task: secure the road, reduce attacks, allow safe passage. What emerges instead is an ongoing system that requires constant maintenance and adjustment. There is no moment when the road is safe enough to be left alone. And so the Templars remain. You see them riding the same stretches year after year, watching the same hills, guarding the same passes. The landscape changes slowly. A new outpost appears. An old settlement disappears. A once dangerous bend becomes quieter, while another grows more threatening. The road is alive in its own way, responding to pressure and opportunity. As external threats intensify, larger armies, shifting borders, organized resistance, the limits of road protection become clearer. Escorts cannot stop wars. They cannot guarantee peace. They can only operate within the spaces that conflict has not yet consumed. Eventually, some routes become untenable. Escorts are reduced or withdrawn. Pilgrimage patterns shift. Sea travel becomes more common despite its own dangers. The land routes do not disappear, but they lose some of their centrality. Protection adapts again, redirecting effort toward fortresses and strategic points rather than constant movement. Looking back, it becomes clear that the Templars' work on the roads achieved something subtle but significant. They did not eliminate danger. They normalized managed risk. They created a model of protection that allowed large numbers of ordinary people to move through hostile territory, often enough that pilgrimage became a sustained practice rather than an exceptional gamble. This had lasting consequences. The movement of people shaped cultural exchange, economic flow, and political awareness. Ideas traveled with pilgrims. Stories crossed borders. Expectations formed about who should be protected and how. The notion that faith-driven civilians deserved organized protection did not vanish with the Crusades. It lingered, evolving into later concepts of safe passage and institutional security. For the individual knight, however, these broader impacts are rarely visible. You experience the road as repetition, vigilance, and restraint. You do not see the long arc of influence. You see only the next journey, the next group, the next risk to be managed. And when you finally leave the road through reassignment, injury, or death, it continues without you. Another knight takes your place. The system endures for now. The unresolved truth is that the roads to Jerusalem were never truly secured, only temporarily negotiated. Protection functioned not as a solution, but as a delay postponing violence, reducing loss, buying time. The question that remains, and that history will answer unevenly, is whether buying time is enough. When faith depends on movement, and movement depends on fragile protection, what happens when the cost of maintaining that protection begins to outweigh what it preserves? Story 4. Faith, Poverty, and Discipline. The Templar Rule and Inner Life. You enter the inner life of the Knights Templar not through battle or travel, but through a book. It is not a large book, and it is not poetic. The rule of the Templars is practical, specific, and often repetitive. It tells you how to live when to wake, what to wear, how to eat, when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to think about your own desires. It is less concerned with inspiring holiness than with preventing disorder. This focus is deliberate. The men who designed the rule understood something about human behavior. Left unstructured, it tends toward excess. Pride, greed, resentment, desire, these are not abstract sins but daily risks, especially for armed men living under pressure. The rule exists to contain these risks through habit. From the moment you enter the order, the rule becomes your constant companion. It is read aloud regularly, not because you forget it, but because repetition reinforces obedience. You do not debate its meaning, you absorb it. Poverty is one of its central demands. You give up personal ownership entirely. Money, clothing, weapons, even small personal items are forbidden unless explicitly allowed. This is not symbolic poverty, it is functional. By removing private property, the rule aims to eliminate jealousy, competition, and distraction. You cannot envy what no one owns. In practice, this creates a strange psychological effect. You rely completely on the institution for your needs. Food, shelter, equipment, all are provided, or not, according to collective resources. Gratitude replaces choice. Complaints become moral failings rather than expressions of discomfort. You learn to accept what is given without comparison. Chastity is another pillar, enforced through separation and vigilance. Women are largely excluded from Templar spaces. Interaction is limited and regulated. This is not because desire is considered uniquely dangerous, but because it is seen as unpredictable. The rule treats sexual temptation as a destabilizing force that must be minimized rather than managed. Silence supports this goal. By limiting speech, the order limits intimacy. Emotional bonds are kept practical rather than personal. Brotherhood exists, but it is shaped by duty rather than affection. This reduces conflict, but it also reduces warmth. Obedience ties everything together. You do not choose your tasks. You do not choose your location. You do not choose when to rest. Orders are given, and you comply. Even questioning an order, unless done through formal channels, is discouraged. The rule assumes that cohesion matters more than individual judgment. This assumption is tested daily in small ways. You may be ordered to perform work you find pointless. You may disagree with a superior's decision. You may feel that a task could be done better differently. These thoughts are expected and dismissed. The rule trains you to subordinate them. Obedience is not about agreement. It is about submission. For some, this is liberating. The burden of choice is lifted. Responsibility feels shared. For others, it creates inner conflict. The rule offers no space to explore this conflict. It offers structure instead. Prayer fills the spaces between work, but it is shaped by the same logic. The prayers are fixed. The times are fixed. Personal expression is secondary to collective rhythm. You pray because it is time to pray, not because you feel moved. This does not mean faith is absent. It means faith is externalized. It is practiced through action rather than reflection. The rule assumes that correct behavior will shape correct belief over time. This approach produces consistency, but it also produces spiritual ambiguity. Some brothers feel deeply aligned with this system. Others feel spiritually numb. Doubt is not condemned outright, but it is not explored. The prescribed response to doubt is more discipline, more prayer, more work, more silence. The rule is especially concerned with preventing pride. You are discouraged from seeking recognition. Heroic acts are not celebrated individually. Success belongs to the order. Failure belongs to the individual. This asymmetry reinforces humility, but it can also feel unfair. Risk is collective. Blame is often personal. Punishment follows the same logic. Minor infractions are met with visible but restrained penalties: eating on the floor, loss of privileges, public acknowledgement of fault. Severe offenses lead to imprisonment within the order or expulsion. Forgiveness is conditional on repentance and obedience, not emotional reconciliation. The goal is correction, not comfort. Over time, the rule becomes internal. You enforce it on yourself even when no one is watching. You regulate your speech. You suppress irritation. You adjust expectations downward. This self-regulation is the foundation of the order's stability. Yet no rule can account for every human experience. The rule was written for a specific moment, a small group of men guarding pilgrims in a hostile land. As the order grows and its responsibilities expand, the rule remains largely unchanged. It continues to shape lives in contexts its authors never imagined. This rigidity creates tension between principle and reality. For example, the vow of poverty becomes more complicated as the order accumulates wealth. You may personally own nothing, but you manage vast resources on behalf of the institution. This requires judgment, negotiation, and sometimes compromise. The rule offers limited guidance here. It assumes simplicity in a world that is becoming complex. Similarly, obedience becomes harder to practice as command structures expand. Orders come from farther away. Context is thinner. The rule demands trust, but trust is strained by distance. From the inside, these tensions are rarely discussed openly. The rule does not encourage adaptation through dialogue. It encourages endurance. As you live under it day after day, the rule shapes not only behavior but perception. You begin to see the world in terms of order and disorder, obedience and deviation. Ambiguity becomes uncomfortable. Structure feels safe. This mindset will serve the order well for many years. It will also leave it vulnerable when challenged by forces that do not respect its internal logic. The unresolved question at the heart of the Templar rule is whether discipline alone can sustain faith over time, or whether faith requires space for doubt, adaptation, and change that rigid structure cannot easily provide. As the Knights Templar grow more powerful and more scrutinized, how will this tightly regulated inner life respond when the world begins to question not just their actions, but their very right to exist? Living under the rule for any extended period is like walking a narrow path every day, knowing that stepping even slightly off the trail invites scrutiny, discipline, and subtle judgment. You begin to feel that your life is measured less by personal accomplishment than by the absence of failure, the faithful repetition of duties, and your ability to survive the monotony without complaint. The first challenge is simple: endurance. Every day begins and ends according to bells and orders. You wake before dawn, you kneel in prayer, you clean armor, tend horses, inspect weapons. You eat under supervision, you speak when allowed, you move when directed. Sleep is fragmented, leisure is rare. The rhythm is relentless, almost hypnotic. In the first months it feels strange, even oppressive. But over time, repetition becomes comforting. The predictable structure prevents chaos, even if it suppresses initiative. Yet the monotony is only the surface. Beneath it lies tension, subtle but persistent. The Templars are not merely trying to survive, they are expected to excel at obedience, vigilance, and moral conduct simultaneously. Any lapse in patience, a careless word, minor laziness carries consequences. You internalize this vigilance. Your mind constantly checks itself. Have I spoken too much? Have I cleaned the weapons thoroughly? Have I observed the rule exactly? Fatigue compounds this tension. The longer you serve, the more vigilance becomes automatic, a quiet anxiety woven into your every action. Obedience is tested in more complex ways than simply following orders. You are sometimes asked to make decisions on behalf of the order, allocate provisions, distribute tasks, manage equipment. While the rule emphasizes uniformity and compliance, reality is messier. Supplies are finite. Weather changes. Human behavior is unpredictable. Following the letter of the rule may conflict with practical judgment. Acting pragmatically may feel like bending it. In these moments, every choice carries moral and practical weight. You are never truly alone, but the burden feels intensely personal. This tension between principle and practice is compounded by hierarchy. Commanders are rarely tyrannical, but they are human. They make decisions based on experience, not necessarily on reason. Some are compassionate, some are rigid, some are inconsistent. The rule provides no perfect mechanism for navigating this variability, only the expectation that you will comply regardless. Over time, you learn to read subtle cues, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to act without direction. You become a student of human behavior as much as a student of doctrine. Fasting and frugality test the body as well as the spirit. Meals are designed for sustenance, not comfort. Overeating is forbidden. Waste is forbidden. Luxury is forbidden. Even basic indulgences, wine, butter, soft bread, are rare. Many brothers accept this as natural. Hunger becomes routine, yet it leaves a quiet mark on morale and resilience. Physical strain mirrors the internal discipline required by obedience. Body and mind are trained together. Spiritual life is intertwined with these tests. Prayer is constant and regimented, yet the repetition can dull meaning. Some brothers feel their connection to God deepening through discipline. Others find it mechanical, a ritual that structures life without touching the heart. This quiet spiritual ambivalence is rarely acknowledged openly. Expression of doubt is often seen as weakness or pride, which the rule seeks to correct. The tension between spiritual sincerity and ritual compliance becomes a defining feature of daily life. Isolation and communal living further complicate this. Dormitories house dozens of brothers. Privacy is minimal. Emotional intimacy is tightly constrained by vows of obedience and silence. Trust exists, but it is structured around duty, not affection. Mistakes or conflicts are rarely mediated through personal reconciliation. Instead, they are addressed through procedural correction, a public warning, a loss of privilege, a task reassignment. Emotional needs are secondary to institutional priorities. Yet paradoxically, the rule fosters a kind of resilience that few other systems could achieve. You learn to suppress distraction, regulate behavior, and endure hardship. You internalize structure, allowing the order to function smoothly. This resilience becomes both protective and constraining. It shields you from chaos while limiting flexibility, creating a stable but brittle environment. External pressures amplify these internal strains. As the order grows wealthier and more influential, scrutiny increases. Kings, local lords, and the church observe the knights not just as soldiers or protectors, but as representatives of authority and morality. Expectations expand. You are not merely following a spiritual and practical code. You are embodying the ideals of the order for outsiders. Every small failure, every human lapse carries symbolic weight. Your personal discipline now contributes to the reputation of an entire institution. This is where discipline collides with consequence. In minor ways, it is invisible. A poorly executed patrol, a mismanaged granary, a misstep in ritual. In major ways, it is visible. Accusations of favoritism, misappropriation of resources, or disobedience can spiral into scrutiny or censure. The same qualities that sustain daily life obedience, endurance, conformity, also make the order dependent on the near perfection of its members. One failure may ripple outward. Through this lens, the rule is both protective and limiting. It creates order, stability, and continuity. It fosters resilience, obedience, and collective identity. But it also restricts personal agency, suppresses doubt, and narrows the capacity for adaptation. The system works best in a stable environment. It functions less well when confronted with rapid change, political intrigue, or external scrutiny that demands more than habitual compliance. By the end of years within the order, you are both a product and a servant of the rule. You act predictably, endure hardships with measured tolerance, and maintain a life regulated by structure. Your mind and body have internalized limits, patterns, and rhythms. The rule shapes not only what you do, but how you perceive reality. Your individuality blends with the institution, sometimes unnoticed until it is tested. And yet, history reminds us, no rule is immune to the world's unpredictability. Political shifts, military losses, or accusations of impropriety can challenge even the most disciplined institutions. The question that begins to surface is both personal and historical. When the rule that sustains life also constrains it, can discipline alone be enough to preserve faith, reputation, and the order itself? The unresolved thought lingers in the quiet moments of reflection. A system built to contain human flaws may succeed only as long as the flaws do not exceed what structure can absorb. By the time you have lived under the rule for many years, you realize that its influence extends far beyond the hours of work, prayer, and supervision. It shapes not only your day but your perception of the world and your place within it. The Templar rule is not a set of suggestions. It is an architecture of life, quietly molding mind, body, and spirit into a form that the order can rely upon in perpetuity. One of the most striking effects is the internalization of discipline. Decisions are no longer made consciously but according to habit. You do not pause to consider whether to clean your armor, tend the horses, or rise for prayer. You act. Obedience becomes instinct. This is both the strength and limitation of the rule. It produces men capable of extraordinary consistency, yet at the cost of flexibility. When new or unexpected challenges arise, you may follow the procedure rather than adapt, trusting the form rather than the spirit. Poverty and simplicity are similarly internalized. What begins as an external imposition, giving up money, possessions, and personal autonomy, becomes a framework through which you interpret life. Wealth and luxury are distractions, sources of pride or envy. Desire is a liability. By removing these pressures, the rule aims to focus attention on duty and God, yet it also narrows experience. You learn to measure value not by what is gained, but by what is faithfully maintained. The rule's regulation of speech and silence carries long-term consequences for thought and emotion. You learn to filter yourself constantly. Words are not casual. They are instruments that can create or destroy order. Emotions are disciplined into invisibility. This creates a kind of internal calm, but it also produces a subtle tension, a quiet isolation that is never fully acknowledged. Brotherhood exists, but it is shaped more by routine than intimacy. You trust men because they follow the same rules, not necessarily because of shared understanding or affection. Spiritual life under the rule is paradoxical. Faith is meant to flourish, yet expression is constrained. The daily repetition of prayer, ritual, and meditation is both protective and numbing. Some brothers find deep meaning in this structured devotion. Others experience a mechanical spirituality, a life that functions as if God's presence is assumed rather than felt. In either case, the order believes that correct behavior produces correct belief. Over time, this assumption becomes internalized. You do not choose faith daily. Faith is performed through action. The long-term effect of the rule is to create a community that is extraordinarily durable. The order can survive without charismatic leaders because the discipline of its members carries the mission forward. Every task, minor and major, is standardized. Procedures are internalized. Accountability is clear. The system absorbs individual variation, and in doing so, produces collective resilience. This is why the Templars could operate across vast territories, guard pilgrims, manage estates, and maintain military readiness simultaneously. Yet resilience has limits. The very qualities that allow the order to endure discipline, obedience, suppression of individuality, reliance on routine also leave it vulnerable to change outside its internal logic. Political intrigue, accusations from kings, sudden attacks, or systemic envy cannot be managed through repetition or habit alone. The structure is strong, but brittle. History shows that rigid systems, no matter how disciplined, struggle when confronted by forces that do not respect the rules they were built upon. This tension is illustrated vividly in the later years of the order. Wealth accumulates, altering the dynamic of poverty vows. Influence grows, attracting both respect and suspicion. Battles are won and lost, sometimes for reasons that discipline alone could not prevent. The rule shapes daily life but does not dictate outcomes in the broader world. Obedience can maintain internal cohesion but cannot shield against external disruption. The personal consequence for brothers is profound. By the end of years of service, identity is inseparable from duty. You act, pray, and endure because that is what the order expects, and your mind has internalized that expectation. Autonomy is rare, even when theoretically possible. The rule shapes not only conduct but perception, gradually conditioning the way you interpret choices, successes, failures, and morality. In this way, the rule extends its influence far beyond individual lifetimes. Men trained under it reproduce its discipline in successors. Estates, fortresses, and armies operate according to internalized procedure. Even when leaders die, the system carries forward. The rule is not merely instruction, it is cultural DNA, shaping the behavior of the order for generations. Yet it is also a quiet cautionary tale. When survival depends on structure more than adaptability, strength can become rigidity. Discipline can produce endurance, but it cannot prevent all collapse. Faith may be preserved in habit, but it may wither in spirit. Individual courage may be constrained by obedience. And institutions, no matter how well organized, are subject to pressures they cannot entirely control. Looking back, one begins to see the paradox at the heart of the Templar rule. It is both protective and limiting, sustaining life while constraining it, guiding action while narrowing freedom. Its effectiveness comes from shaping men into reliable instruments of the order, but this same shaping leaves men and the institution vulnerable to forces that operate outside the logic of routine. In the end, the rule's greatest legacy is subtle. It is not battlefield victories or wealth or political influence, though the order achieved all these. It is the creation of a human system capable of sustained function under extraordinary circumstances, a blueprint for resilience that relies on internalized discipline more than inspiration, endurance more than heroism. And yet, the unresolved question remains. When a system is built to contain human weakness, can it adapt when human ambition, envy, fear, or political intrigue challenge the very structure that sustains it? Will discipline and obedience be enough to survive, or will the rigidity that preserves order also plant the seeds of collapse? This tension, the coexistence of enduring strength and latent vulnerability, casts a long shadow over the history of the Knights Templar, reminding us that even the most disciplined institutions are never entirely immune to the unpredictable currents of human history. Story 5. Building Castles and Fortresses, the Templar Legacy in Stone. To understand the Knights Templar beyond their vows and battles, you must look at what they left behind in stone. Fortresses, castles, and watchtowers stretch across the Levant, silent and unyielding. They are more than symbols of power. They are the practical backbone of an order whose mission combined faith, protection, and military strategy. You begin with the landscape. The Levant is a mixture of arid plains, rocky hills, and narrow valleys. The terrain is beautiful but unforgiving. Rain falls irregularly, rivers are often seasonal, and wood is scarce. Settlements cluster where water is reliable. The rest of the land is largely uninhabitable, or at least unprotected. For pilgrims and locals alike, movement through this region is risky without shelter or organized defense. The Templars recognized this necessity early. To guard pilgrims, supply lines, and strategic points, they needed strongholds that could withstand siege, command visibility over surrounding terrain, and serve as logistical hubs. The choice of location is meticulous. Hills and ridges are preferred for vantage points. River crossings are fortified to control movement. Road junctions and trade paths are reinforced to secure commerce and travel. Every stone placed serves a dual purpose: protection and projection of authority. Building a fortress is not quick. You cannot transport massive stones easily. You cannot rely solely on local labor. Often, the order imports skilled masons from Europe, along with stonemasons, carpenters, and engineers capable of translating architectural plans into enduring structures. Labor is organized rigorously. Knights supervise, laborers toil, and the rule governs behavior on site. Discipline is as critical in construction as it is in battle. Mistakes are costly. A misaligned wall or poorly built tower can compromise defense for decades. Fortifications serve multiple functions. First is defense. Walls are thick, often several meters wide, designed to resist battering rams and mining attempts. Towers provide overlapping fields of fire. Gates are reinforced with iron and wood, constructed to resist prolonged assault. Moats, when feasible, impede attackers and channel movement. Every angle of a fortress is calculated for the logic of defense, anticipating how enemies might attempt to breach it, and how a relatively small garrison can repel a much larger force. Second is administration. A fortress is also a base of operations. Barracks, armories, kitchens, and chapels are integrated into the layout. Storerooms hold provisions for months, sometimes years. Water cisterns are carefully engineered to capture and store scarce rainfall. The fortress must be self-sustaining, capable of withstanding isolation during extended sieges. Each design decision balances comfort, efficiency, and military necessity. Third is control. Fortresses assert authority over surrounding areas. Visibility allows knights to monitor roads, villages, and potential enemy movements. Fortifications serve as deterrents. The sight of thick walls and armed men discourages banditry, discourages surprise attacks, and communicates the order's presence in a region where political control is fluid. Construction is grueling and unending. Materials must be quarried, transported, shaped, and assembled. Knights often participate directly, both to supervise and to demonstrate commitment. Laborers live under strict discipline. Workdays are long, punctuated by prayer and meals of frugal sustenance. Errors are punished. Sloppiness is not tolerated. Yet even under harsh conditions, camaraderie develops among builders. Shared hardship fosters loyalty and endurance. The architecture itself evolves over time. Early fortresses are simple, curtain walls and basic towers. Later constructions become complex, reflecting experience with siege technology, geography, and enemy tactics. Concentric walls appear, offering multiple layers of defense. Gatehouses grow stronger, towers taller, cisterns larger. Each adaptation reflects the lessons of prior conflict failures turned into structural wisdom. Yet building these fortresses is only half the challenge. Once completed, they must be garrisoned, supplied, and maintained. Stones do not fight, men do. The order assigns knights and sergeants to oversee each stronghold. Daily routines mirror the life under the rule: patrols, training, maintenance, prayer, and administration. Fortresses require constant attention. A single lapse rot in timber, crumbling mortar, neglected defenses can render even the most impressive walls useless. Fortresses also affect local populations. Villagers near Templar castles experience both protection and control. Security is offered in exchange for allegiance, labor, or tribute. Trade routes are monitored. taxes sometimes imposed and labor occasionally required for repairs. For locals, fortresses are a source of stability, but they are also a reminder of the order's power. Relationships are delicate. Cooperation ensures safety. Resistance invites surveillance or punishment. Despite these challenges, the fortresses succeed in their primary mission, enabling the order to operate effectively across a hostile region. They serve as staging points for military campaigns, safe havens for pilgrims, and administrative hubs for estates and resources. Through stone and mortar, the Knights Templar extend their influence far beyond the individual knight on patrol. Their presence becomes a permanent feature of the landscape, a network of calculated authority built to endure long after any single member departs. Yet permanence is never guaranteed. Even the strongest fortress is vulnerable to changing political realities. Alliances shift. Enemy forces adapt. Natural disasters occur. Fortresses can be captured, abandoned, or rendered obsolete. Every stone that is carefully placed becomes part of a fragile equation, balancing human effort against the unpredictability of history. The tension between permanence and fragility is central to understanding the Templar legacy. Stones are lasting, but people are impermanent. Discipline, vigilance, and planning can prolong security, but they cannot prevent the larger currents of politics, war, and time from reshaping the world around the fortresses. Each castle embodies both power and uncertainty, strength and vulnerability. And here lies the lingering question. The Knights Templar built fortresses to withstand attack, organize their work, and project authority, but how well could these monuments of stone shield them from the more subtle forces of history? Could walls, however thick and cleverly designed, protect an institution as human as the order itself, subject to envy, suspicion, and eventual political upheaval? The answer, history suggests, would not come in the walls themselves, but in the centuries of consequence they left behind. Once a fortress is completed, the work does not end. In fact, the construction is only the first stage. What follows is the day-to-day life of garrisoning, maintaining, and defending these massive stone structures, a life as demanding, regimented, and quietly perilous as any battlefield engagement. From the moment a knight arrives at a fortress, routine dictates existence. Patrols must be organized to monitor every approach, every slope, every path where enemies or wandering pilgrims might appear. Scouts ride ahead to distant ridges while sentries are posted along walls and towers. Even a brief lapse in vigilance can allow attackers to exploit a weakness. The walls themselves are useless without constant observation. Life inside the fortress is a careful balance between labor, discipline, and surveillance. Knights wake before dawn to prayers, followed by inspections of equipment and fortifications. Soldiers and laborers maintain the walls, repair gates, clean weapons, and ensure that supplies, food, water, arrows, and tools are sufficient for both daily needs and unexpected sieges. Kitchens are busy from early morning, and stores of grain, wine, and preserved food are inventoried meticulously. A mistake in these calculations could mean hunger during the dry season or siege. Even leisure is regimented. Knights may train with swords or practice riding in the courtyard, but there is little unstructured time. Socializing is monitored and limited, often taking the form of discussions about strategy, history, or religious matters. Personal pursuits, when allowed, are quiet and modest. The rule governs not only the way men act, but the space in which they think and express themselves. Boredom, when it appears, is often channeled into meditation, prayer, or minor repairs. The physical strain of garrison life is relentless. Fortresses are often perched on high ridges or rocky outcrops. Climbing walls, hauling water, carrying stones, and standing sentry in armor under the sun or cold wind is exhausting. Every physical task reinforces discipline and endurance, yet each day slowly wears down the body. Small injuries, cuts, blisters, muscle strain are routine. Severe injuries may leave men unfit for duty, creating gaps in the defense network that must be covered. The psychological strain is just as constant. Fortresses are designed for defense, not comfort. Isolation is common. A knight might spend weeks or months in a remote stronghold with only a handful of companions. Threat is never far from mind. Raiders, enemy armies, internal dissent, and even disease can strike unexpectedly. Sentries peer into the distance constantly, scanning for movement that may never come or that may appear too late. The tension is quiet but persistent, an invisible weight pressing on all who reside behind stone walls. Fortresses are also hubs of logistics and administration. Knights manage not only military duties but agricultural estates, trade routes, and local interactions. Villages under the fortress's protection rely on the order for security, but also provide labor, produce, and other resources. Balancing protection with control is delicate. Abuse or neglect can provoke resentment. Generosity or leniency can be exploited. Every decision is consequential. The fortress is not just a building, it is a microcosm of the order's broader responsibilities. Despite these challenges, life in a fortress can offer a strange sense of purpose. Every patrol, every repaired wall, every drilled formation contributes to survival. Discipline is the glue that binds men together and holds the structure against external pressures. Pride is found not in comfort or recognition, but in the smooth functioning of a complex, fragile system. You learn to measure success in sustained vigilance and the absence of failure rather than heroic feats. Yet fortresses are not impervious. Siege warfare evolves constantly. Enemy engineers study walls, design catapults, dig tunnels, and exploit weak points. Weather erodes mortar, floods threaten lower levels, and fire can devastate wooden elements. Knights must anticipate these threats and respond before disaster strikes. A single lapse, an overlooked crack, a neglected patrol, a poorly trained recruit can undermine years of meticulous construction. The human element is equally unpredictable. Fatigue, illness, and morale affect efficiency. Even disciplined men are susceptible to error. Commanders must balance authority with empathy, maintaining order while attending to the very human needs of those under their care. In this way, a fortress is both a machine and a community, its endurance dependent on careful attention to both physical and psychological systems. Fortresses also shape local and regional dynamics. Villages and trade routes cluster around strongholds, benefiting from protection but also bound by obligation. The Templars enforce roads, collect resources, and monitor activity. Merchants, pilgrims, and peasants alike become part of the logistical network centered on the fortress. In this sense, stone structures are more than defensive, they are instruments of governance and influence, quietly extending the order's reach into surrounding lands. Yet permanence remains elusive. Political tides shift, alliances change, natural disasters strike without warning. Even a fortress that has withstood decades of wear and war is not immune to larger historical forces. The Order's human network, disciplined as it may be, cannot completely control the world beyond the walls. Fortresses are buffers, not solutions. They delay outcomes, manage risk, and enable strategic action, but they do not guarantee survival. The experience of living within a fortress teaches subtle lessons about resilience, human behavior, and the limits of control. It shows that security is never absolute, and that endurance often matters more than heroism. It demonstrates how meticulous organization and constant vigilance can extend influence far beyond individual lifetimes. And it hints at the fragile balance between strength and vulnerability that defines human institutions. As you step back from the walls, towers, and courtyards, a question emerges. The Knights Templar built fortresses that could withstand siege, shape communities, and extend authority, but could even the most disciplined garrison, the most carefully planned bastion, protect an institution from forces that operate outside the logic of stone, rule, and ritual? The answer, history suggests, would be tested not by walls, but by time itself. The final chapter of a fortress's story is always longer than any battle it has seen. Stone endures, timber decays, mortar crumbles, and yet the human decisions that placed each rock, carved each arrow slit, and designed each tower echo far beyond the lifetimes of those who labored to build them. To understand the Templar legacy, you must look at the interaction between these stones and the people who lived within them. A fortress, no matter how strong, is never complete. It requires maintenance, vigilance, and adaptation. Roofs leak, wooden floors warp, wells silt up. Even a minor oversight in repairs can compromise defense, food storage, or water supply. The knights assigned to these tasks are constantly balancing routine upkeep with preparation for possible attack. The day-to-day labor is grueling, repetitive, and largely invisible in the grand narrative of history. Yet it is what allows walls to hold against more dramatic threats. Endurance is tested in multiple ways. A fortress may repel siege after siege, yet slowly succumb to exhaustion. Supplies run low, morale falters, or garrison numbers dwindle. Isolation magnifies human weakness. The longer men live under walls, the more subtle the pressures. Fatigue, cabin fever, disputes over resources. Even the most disciplined knights can succumb to despair, illness, or carelessness. The fortress becomes a mirror, reflecting not just external threats, but the limitations and resilience of the people within it. The social dynamics inside are as crucial as the physical structure. Fortresses function as miniature societies, combining military, religious, and administrative elements. Hierarchy governs behavior. The rule shapes daily life. Leaders must manage not only strategy but psychology, ensuring that obedience and discipline coexist with the human need for sustenance, rest, and recognition. A garrison is both a machine and a community, requiring constant calibration. Failure in this delicate balance can weaken walls more effectively than any siege engine. Fortresses are also instruments of influence, extending the order's reach far beyond their immediate location. Roads, trade, and pilgrimage routes are monitored from their towers. Villages live in proximity to both protection and oversight. Merchants rely on the security they provide. Travelers, including pilgrims, use the fortress as a hub for rest, resupply, and guidance. In this way, the stone structures are not just defensive, they are organizational, economic, and social nodes in a network that sustains the order's power. Yet even as these fortresses exert control, they remain vulnerable to forces beyond the knight's mastery. Political tides shift unpredictably. Local rulers grow jealous, resentful, or ambitious. Enemy forces innovate, exploiting weaknesses that the architects never imagined. Disease, famine, and fire threaten the structure and its inhabitants alike. The very permanence of stone is deceptive. It suggests stability, but only the human labor and organization that animate it can defend against disruption. Over decades, some fortresses fall into disuse, abandoned as military strategies change or resources are redirected. Others are captured by opponents, repurposed, or destroyed. Yet the legacy of their construction remains, visible in the landscape, shaping settlement patterns and influencing political control long after the knights themselves are gone. The stones, once silent, continue to tell the story of discipline, planning, and endurance. The Templar experience teaches an enduring lesson about human institutions. Resilience is as much about daily effort as it is about grand designs. A fortress survives not because of the genius of architects, but because of the meticulous, repetitive work of men who maintain it, patrol it, and enforce its order. The lessons embedded in these structures are lessons in vigilance, adaptation, and the balance between human effort and the inevitable passage of time. Even the most enduring fortresses cannot prevent the eventual unraveling of the order. When political tides shift, when suspicion and envy mount, when kings and popes turn against the knights, the walls cannot shield them. Wealth, influence, and power, all of which the fortresses help sustain, become liabilities. The order's vulnerabilities were never just external, they were baked into the very systems that had enabled its strength. The meticulous discipline and structured life that supported the fortresses could not protect against political intrigue or mass arrests, orchestrated by authority figures beyond their control. And yet their stones endure quietly. A ruined tower still marks a hilltop. A partially collapsed gate still signals control of a former road. Even when the human institutions that built and maintained them vanish, the fortresses speak. They testify to strategy, endurance, and the complex interplay of order and vulnerability. They remind us that history is not only made in battles or by famous individuals, but in the quiet, daily work of maintaining structures, systems, and human communities. For the individual knight, the lesson is subtle but profound. True achievement is measured not only by conquest or valor, but by the ability to sustain life and order through repetition, discipline, and vigilance. The walls protect, but they also reflect human effort and limitation. The impact of those efforts often outlasts any one life, yet the fragility of human institutions remains, waiting for a moment when time, politics, or ambition tests the limits of even the most enduring stone. The unresolved reflection lingers. The Templars built fortresses to withstand attack, maintain order, and project authority, but could any amount of stone, discipline, or vigilance protect them from the unpredictable currents of history that would ultimately undo the order itself? And perhaps more quietly, can any human system, no matter how meticulously constructed, survive the test of time without adaptation, foresight, and flexibility? The stones remain as a testament both to the remarkable endurance of the order and to the fragility of all human endeavor. Story 6. Templar Treasure and Financial Networks, the Business of Faith. You may think of the Knights Templar as warriors cloaked in white, riding across deserts and hills to defend pilgrims and fight in the Crusades. Yet behind the swords and fortresses lay a far less visible but equally powerful instrument: wealth. Unlike other orders, the Templars developed an intricate system of finance, transforming alms, donations, and landholdings into a network that spanned Europe and the Levant. Understanding their wealth is understanding the lifeblood that allowed their military and religious endeavors to endure. The foundation of this wealth begins with faith and obligation. Nobles, merchants, and kings offered donations in return for spiritual benefit. Land, livestock, money, and sometimes even entire villages were granted to the order. These gifts were rarely casual. They were transactional in nature. Donors expected prayers, spiritual protection, and the prestige of association. Every donation became both a spiritual investment and a practical resource. Early on, the Templars developed a system for managing this wealth that was unusual for its time. They maintained detailed records of donations, obligations, and expenditures, often using forms of proto-banking and accounting practices that would not become common in Europe for decades. A gift of land in France could be tracked, its revenue collected, and the funds sent to support fortresses in Jerusalem. The order became a bridge between continents, moving resources across political and geographical boundaries with surprising efficiency. The financial network was tied closely to the order's spiritual mission. Pilgrims, travelers, and members of the clergy relied on Templar wealth not for profit but for service. Hospices were funded, roads were maintained, fortresses provisioned, and knights equipped. Money became an instrument of operational sustainability. It was rarely hoarded. Wealth was functional, carefully allocated, and constantly monitored. This practicality extended to property management. The order's estates were organized with efficiency in mind. Agricultural lands produced food and income. Mills processed grain. Vineyards, orchards, and livestock provided sustenance and trade goods. Managers, often knights trained in administrative as well as military skills, oversaw labor, production, and taxation. Local villagers were integrated into these operations, often supplying labor in exchange for protection and access to the market network the Templars provided. Even more sophisticated was their use of a system resembling early banking. A noble in Paris could deposit funds with a Templar preceptory and receive a letter of credit that allowed withdrawal in Acre or Cyprus. This reduced the risk of transporting coins through dangerous lands and created a network of trust that extended across kingdoms. In effect, the order functioned as both spiritual guardian and financial intermediary. Security was central to the system. Where knights protected pilgrims and fortresses, they also protected wealth. Treasuries were constructed with layers of security, fortified chambers, guards, restricted access, and detailed logs of all transactions. The management of money mirrored military discipline. Both required precision, accountability, and vigilance. Even a minor error could jeopardize resources or reputation. The combination of disciplined administration, strategic landholding, and financial ingenuity created a feedback loop. Wealth allowed the order to maintain fortresses, support knights, and expand influence. Those resources, in turn, reinforced the perception of power and reliability, attracting more donations and investment. The Templars became both highly respected and increasingly essential to European elites, who relied on their ability to move money safely and efficiently. This influence extended beyond Europe. The Order's network facilitated trade and logistics across the Mediterranean. Ships carrying goods, money, and personnel were coordinated through Templar contacts. Fortresses acted as regional hubs where financial, military, and logistical functions converged. The Templars were not merely warriors, they were administrators, accountants, and bankers who understood that strategic advantage depended as much on funds as on swords. The structure of wealth management also reflected internal hierarchy and the rule. Every transaction, from land acquisition to shipment of coin, was carefully documented. Commanders exercised oversight. Regular audits ensured fidelity. Transparency, for the Order's internal purposes, reinforced trust and discipline. Members learned to reconcile spiritual devotion with financial responsibility, understanding that wealth was not merely a reward but a tool for sustaining mission and mission-related discipline. Yet with this sophistication came vulnerability. The concentration of wealth in cross-border operations made the Order a target for envy, suspicion, and political manipulation. Kings and popes could demand contributions, question accounting, or accuse the Order of impropriety. Even the best-managed network could not fully protect against the perception of threat. Wealth, while empowering, also created exposure. The Templars' financial networks were both a source of resilience and a point of fragility. Their ability to mobilize resources efficiently underpinned military campaigns, fortified pilgrim routes, and maintained sprawling estates. But the same system, so efficient and centralized, made the Order a symbol of power that invited scrutiny. Looking at their treasury, preceptories, and letters of credit, you begin to see the interplay between faith, discipline, and pragmatism. Wealth was not accumulated for luxury or status. It was functional, religiously sanctioned, and tightly controlled. Yet it inevitably brought the Order into contact with political and economic realities far beyond the scope of its original spiritual mission. And so the question arises, quietly but persistently. The Knights Templar built a financial empire to sustain their mission and protect pilgrims. Yet could the very wealth that enabled their influence also contribute to their eventual downfall? Could money, the instrument of faith and discipline, become the target that history used to unravel the Order? The Knights Templar were more than warriors. They were pioneers of financial systems in a Europe still dominated by barter, coin shortages, and local economies. By the 12th and 13th centuries, their network had evolved into something resembling an early international bank, with preceptories across Europe acting as branches and letters of credit functioning like checks. Understanding the Templar financial system requires looking closely at the mechanics, the risks, and the human ingenuity that made it work, and the vulnerabilities it created. At the core of the system was trust, codified and reinforced through discipline and ritual. When a noble deposited funds with the Templars, they did so based on the Order's reputation for honesty, reliability, and protection. The knight entrusted with this transaction was trained in both combat and administration, expected to guard the treasure physically, and account for it rigorously. Errors were unacceptable. Fraud, negligence, or mismanagement could not only ruin the individual, but jeopardize the order's credibility. The rule, which shaped the inner lives of knights, extended to these financial duties, emphasizing meticulous record-keeping and obedience to procedural hierarchy. Letters of credit, one of the most sophisticated tools in the Templar system, allowed money to move safely across hundreds of miles. A noble in France could deposit coins with a Templar preceptory and receive a document guaranteeing a corresponding sum in acre or cypress. This minimized the dangers of carrying gold across bandit-ridden roads and politically unstable regions. Knights would escort high-value transfers when necessary, ensuring that the movement of wealth was protected by armed vigilance as well as legal authority. Yet this system was far from foolproof. The success of a financial transaction depended on multiple factors: the accuracy of records, the reliability of local commanders, the safety of trade routes, and the stability of political alliances. A sudden rebellion, raid, or misunderstanding could disrupt transfers. Mistakes in bookkeeping or miscommunication between preceptories could create disputes over ownership or entitlement. The network required constant attention, vigilance, and adaptability, a human web underpinned by discipline but never entirely secure. The Templars' estates served as both economic engines and collateral for financial operations. Agricultural production, mills, vineyards, and markets generated revenue, which could be funneled to support operations abroad or reinvested locally. Estates were managed with military precision, quotas were assigned, laborers supervised, and storage systems monitored. The Templar ideal was simple resources were to be maximized for the mission, not squandered on personal indulgence. Yet the human element, weather, illness, local resistance introduced uncertainty into every calculation. With such an extensive network, the Templars also assumed risk. Wars, sieges, piracy, and natural disasters could devastate holdings or disrupt trade. Political changes could render investments or property null. Even trusted allies could act unpredictably. The very visibility of their wealth made them targets, and the order had to balance ambition with caution. Success required foresight, redundancy, and constant monitoring of both human and environmental factors. Interestingly, the Templar network influenced broader economic practices. Merchants, bankers, and rulers learned from their efficiency and reliability. The order became a model for trust-based financial systems, showing how reputation, record-keeping, and disciplined oversight could substitute for modern regulatory frameworks. Their network helped stabilize commerce in regions prone to conflict, enabling long-distance trade, facilitating pilgrimage, and indirectly supporting the Crusader states. Yet the wealth and influence of the order sowed seeds of vulnerability. Kings grew envious of their holdings, while rivals questioned the legitimacy of such concentrated power in a religious organization. The very practices that allowed the Templars to safeguard resources cross-border networks, centralized control, and confidentiality also made them opaque, fueling suspicion. Wealth, meant to support faith and mission, became a political liability. Inside the order, the management of finances mirrored the discipline that governed every other aspect of life. Knights treated accounts and ledgers with the same rigor as weapon inspections or patrol schedules. Errors were corrected immediately, lapses punished, and procedures repeated until internalized. Finance, like daily life under the rule, was a domain where obedience, precision, and endurance directly influenced survival and reputation. Yet there was an inevitable tension between human ambition and systemic discipline. Some knights were tempted to leverage their position for personal advantage. Some nobles attempted to manipulate the system, and some preceptories acted with discretion that occasionally bordered on improvisation. The order had structures to minimize abuse, but no system is perfect. The interdependence of multiple preceptories, human operators, and political actors created a fragile web, where a single disruption could cascade unexpectedly. As the order matured, this financial network became both its greatest strength and its most exposed vulnerability. The wealth that allowed fortresses to be built, armies to be maintained, and pilgrim routes to be secured also made the order a target for political maneuvering. Suspicion, envy, and ambition coalesced into a perfect storm, creating conditions for future accusations, trials, and eventual suppression. Ultimately, the Templar financial empire illustrates a dual truth about human systems. Discipline, organization, and foresight can achieve extraordinary results, enabling an institution to project power far beyond its immediate human resources. But the same systems, if concentrated, opaque, and politically entangled, invite scrutiny and risk. Human ingenuity can extend influence across continents, yet it cannot fully shield institutions from envy, suspicion, or the unpredictable currents of history. And so the unresolved tension emerges. The very mechanisms that allowed the Knights Templar to thrive financially, militarily, and spiritually also contain the seeds of their downfall. Could a human institution, however disciplined and innovative, survive indefinitely when wealth and influence make it both indispensable and threatening to those in power? The story of Templar wealth is inseparable from the story of its downfall. The very system that allowed the order to operate across continents, protect pilgrims, and manage vast estates also made it vulnerable to political and social forces beyond its control. By the early 14th century, the wealth that had been the lifeblood of the order became a point of contention, suspicion, and ultimately destruction. The downfall begins quietly in whispers and inquiries. Kings and nobles notice that the Templars, despite taking vows of poverty, control more land, money, and resources than many secular authorities. Their financial networks allow rapid mobilization of funds across Europe and the Levant, enabling them to wield influence far beyond their numbers. While this capability benefits allies, it also breeds resentment. Power, even when justified by mission, invites scrutiny. King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the Templars, recognizes both opportunity and threat. By the early 1300s, he moves to seize their assets, framing the order's wealth as evidence of corruption, greed, and heresy. On October 13, 1307, an event remembered through legend and historical record, hundreds of Templars in France are arrested simultaneously. Knights, administrators, and financiers, men who had dedicated their lives to service and discipline, are suddenly accused of unimaginable crimes. Wealth, once a tool of faith and protection, becomes the justification for their imprisonment and the confiscation of property. The arrest exposes the fragility of even the most sophisticated financial network. Ledgers and letters of credit cannot protect against political power. Preceptories fall silent as communications and resource flows are severed. Estates are confiscated, income streams interrupted, and the complex coordination that supported military and humanitarian efforts collapses almost overnight. What took decades of careful planning and disciplined administration to build is undone in a matter of months. Yet the network's legacy endures. Even after suppression, the systems and methods developed by the Templars influenced later financial institutions. Banks, trading houses, and mercantile networks adopt similar methods: letters of credit, regional offices, meticulous record-keeping, and a reputation-based trust system. In a way, the Templars' methods survive longer than the men who built them, embedded in the evolution of European commerce and finance. There is also a broader lesson in the human element. Wealth is never neutral. It interacts with politics, perception, and ambition. The Templars managed resources with extraordinary skill, but no system can fully protect against the perception of threat or envy. Discipline, accounting, and vigilance can sustain an organization, but they cannot insulate it from political expediency. The collapse of Templar wealth is a reminder that financial power is intertwined with social and political legitimacy. The human cost of this collapse is profound. Knights and administrators who spent years ensuring the security of estates, the delivery of funds, and the protection of pilgrims suddenly find themselves imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Their lives, once disciplined and structured around duty and faith, are shattered by forces entirely external to the systems they maintained. It is a stark illustration of how even the most carefully managed resources cannot protect individuals from the caprices of history. And yet, despite destruction, the Templars' influence persists in subtle ways. Fortresses, estates, and former preceptories continue to serve as centers of power, often absorbed into other religious or military institutions. The idea that faith-based organizations can manage complex financial networks without succumbing to corruption or inefficiency leaves a lasting imprint on European governance and commerce. The Templar experience demonstrates that institutional innovation, discipline, and foresight can achieve remarkable results, but also that these achievements are contingent, vulnerable to forces beyond human calculation. Reflecting on this, one realizes that Templar wealth embodies a paradox. It was the instrument of faith and protection, yet it also attracted envy and suspicion. It empowered, yet exposed vulnerability. It ensured operational capability, yet highlighted the limits of human control. The Order's financial network demonstrates both the heights of human ingenuity and the fragile nature of systems that depend on trust, discipline, and political stability. The unresolved thought lingers. The same structures that allow organizations to thrive, discipline, networks, foresight, and accumulated resources, can also make them targets for forces they cannot anticipate. The Templars succeeded in creating a system that extended across continents, yet they could not survive when wealth became a liability rather than a tool. In this, their history serves as both a blueprint and a cautionary tale. Human systems, no matter how disciplined or innovative, remain inseparable from the unpredictable currents of politics, envy, and time. The Order disappears from Europe as an institution, but its methods, ideals, and even some of its infrastructure continue to shape the world. In the ruins of preceptories, in surviving fortresses, and in the echoes of early banking practices, the legacy of the Templar financial system endures, a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of the persistent tension between power, perception, and fragility. Story 7. The Crusader's Life, Daily Survival and Personal Sacrifice. When most people think of the Crusades, they imagine knights charging into battle, banners flying, swords flashing under a desert sun. But the daily reality of a Crusader's life, especially for a Templar, was far more mundane, grueling, and often invisible. Survival required discipline, resilience, and an acceptance of discomfort that few modern minds can fully imagine. Your day begins before dawn. The call to prayer is immediate, precise, unavoidable. You rise from a rough cot in a crowded tent or stone barracks, wash in whatever water is available, and dress in your armor or tunic depending on duty. Meals are minimal, often a thick porridge, bread, or dried meat. Food is rationed according to both availability and rank, and excess is forbidden by both the rule and practical necessity. Hunger is routine, and you learn to carry it quietly, conserving energy for the day's labor or march. After prayer and breakfast, you perform your assigned duties. If stationed at a fortress, this might mean patrols along the walls, inspecting gates, or repairing damaged structures. If in the field, it could involve scouting, gathering water, or maintaining weapons and horses. Every task, no matter how repetitive, carries weight. A neglected post can allow an enemy to approach undetected. A dull blade can fail at a critical moment. The smallest lapses are amplified in a hostile environment where risk is constant. Hygiene is limited but not absent. Soap is rare, water scarce, and bathing often a matter of survival rather than comfort. Disease is a constant companion. Dysentery, fevers, lice, and infections are endemic. Knights who survive battles may fall victim to illness long after the fighting has ceased. Medical knowledge is rudimentary. Treatments rely on herbs, prayer, and rudimentary surgery, leaving many injuries permanent. You accept this reality as part of life, adapting both mentally and physically to conditions that would be intolerable in a modern context. Work and combat duties are interspersed with periods of waiting, observation, and boredom. Hours can pass in silence, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. The desert sun beats down, or the winter chill bites, yet attention cannot waver. Sleep, when it comes, is broken, short, and scheduled around sentries and shifts. The body adapts to discomfort, learning endurance over ease. The mind adapts as well, cultivating patience and vigilance. Camaraderie develops quietly. Fellow knights, squires, and sergeants share labor, meals, and vigilance. Bonds are formed less through affection and more through mutual dependence. Trust is essential. A lapse by one can imperil all. Yet social interaction is restrained by the rule, which emphasizes silence, obedience, and humility. Brotherhood exists, but it is disciplined, functional, and constrained. Emotional expression is often suppressed, creating a culture of quiet stoicism. Supplies are a constant concern. Food, water, and weapons must be managed meticulously. Logistics are a matter of life and death. Horses must be fed and cared for. Arrows and bolts must be repaired. Armor and weapons must be maintained. Failure in any aspect can undermine both personal survival and the operational effectiveness of the unit. The Crusader's life is a continuous exercise in resource management, endurance, and foresight. Weather and terrain introduce additional hazards. The desert, hills, and rivers each present challenges. Rain can flood camps, dust can blind the unwary, and heat stroke or hypothermia can strike without warning. Terrain is both enemy and ally. Narrow passes protect smaller forces but also trap them. Rivers must be crossed carefully. Rocky hills may hide ambushes. Understanding and adapting to the land is as vital as training with a sword. Even outside combat, danger is omnipresent. Bandits, hostile locals, disease, and miscommunication pose constant threats. Every march requires attention to formation, supply, and terrain. Every encounter with locals demands diplomacy or restraint. The Crusader's life is a delicate balance of aggression, vigilance, and negotiation. Amid all this, prayer and ritual provide structure and mental resilience. Spiritual practice offers a framework for understanding suffering, danger, and personal limitation. Faith is intertwined with duty. You fight, march, endure, and serve because you believe in a higher purpose. Even small acts, saying a prayer before a meal, blessing a horse, or attending a chapel service, become moments of stability in a life otherwise defined by uncertainty. Yet the mundane dominates. Most days are spent on repetitive labor, careful observation, and quiet survival. Combat, while dramatic in memory and legend, is episodic. The majority of a crusader's life is negotiation with monotony, endurance of discomfort, and preparation for events that may never occur. Survival depends as much on patience and habit as on courage or strength. By the end of the day, the knight returns to a crowded tent, a stone chamber, or a fortified courtyard. Fatigue is constant. Sleep comes quickly but is shallow. Hunger lingers, muscles ache, and the mind cycles through the day's vigilance and preparation for tomorrow. Life is governed by routines, necessity, and the quiet application of discipline. And yet, amid the monotony, there is meaning. Every meal secured, every gate repaired, every patrol completed contributes to the survival of the order, the protection of pilgrims, and the continuation of a mission that transcends individual desire. The crusader learns that heroism is often invisible, measured not in glory but in endurance, attention to detail, and the quiet fulfillment of duty. The unresolved question emerges as night falls over the camp or fortress. The crusader endures hunger, fatigue, disease, and danger with discipline and faith, but in a world defined by chance, politics, and human ambition, is endurance alone sufficient to protect not just oneself, but the mission, the community, and the ideals for which they fight? The life of a crusader is defined not only by the work you perform, but by the endurance required to persist in a world that offers few comforts and constant threats. By the second month or second year of service, you begin to understand that survival depends as much on psychological resilience as on physical strength. Every day presents challenges that are repetitive, mundane, and exhausting, yet they accumulate into the invisible weight of long-term stress. Fatigue becomes a constant companion. The body adapts to irregular meals, long marches, and nights of interrupted sleep, but the mind remains alert, perpetually scanning for risk. You become aware of every minor detail: the tilt of a tent, the dryness of grain, the sounds of distant movement. A lapse in attention could allow a bandit attack, a logistical failure, or a mismanaged patrol. This hypervigilance is exhausting but essential. It is a form of survival training embedded in everyday routine, conditioning knights to act instinctively when danger arises. Hunger and scarcity impose a subtler form of discipline. Food is basic: hard bread, salted meat, or boiled legumes. Fresh water may be limited, and wine, once considered a small luxury, is rationed for morale and health. The scarcity of resources forces careful management. You eat less than your body desires, adjust habits to preserve energy, and share supplies to maintain communal stability. Hunger is normalized, internalized, and quietly endured. Over time, it teaches not only frugality, but a psychological tolerance for deprivation that shapes behavior far beyond the battlefield. Morale is delicate, influenced by both external events and internal rhythms. Victories lift spirits, but defeats, disease, and deaths weigh heavily. Companions succumb to fever, accidents, or misfortune, reminding everyone of the fragility of life. Letters from home arrive rarely. News of Europe is delayed and filtered. Isolation amplifies both fear and reliance on one another. Bonds are forged in shared hardship, but they are functional rather than sentimental. A network of dependence built on mutual survival rather than friendship. The psychological burden of this life is compounded by the ever-present awareness of duty. Every patrol, every sentry post, every logistical check is more than a task. It is a moral and spiritual obligation. A lapse is not simply practical failure, it is a failure of faith, discipline, and the order itself. Knights internalize this responsibility, creating a persistent tension between personal endurance and institutional expectation. You become both a soldier and a moral agent, accountable not only to your commander, but to a higher purpose. Disease and injury are constant threats. Minor wounds can fester into life-threatening infections. Dysentery, fevers, and parasites claim many lives quietly, far from the battlefield. Medical knowledge is limited. Treatments rely on herbs, poultices, and rudimentary surgical techniques. A small infection can halt a patrol or incapacitate a knight for weeks. Survival depends on vigilance, hygiene where possible, and careful attention to the body's signals, another layer of endurance layered atop the physical, psychological, and spiritual demands of life. Despite the harshness, there is rhythm and structure. Discipline provides predictability, and predictability sustains morale. Morning prayer, inspection, meals, patrols, and training repeat daily. Repetition becomes comforting. Even monotony is structured, each action reinforcing the next. Over months and years, a crusader internalizes this rhythm, creating an inner stability that enables focus and endurance even in chaos. The human cost of this life is often invisible. Youths who enter the order may leave physically hardened but emotionally constrained. Personal ambition, fear, grief, and doubt are subordinated to collective discipline. The suppression of individuality, necessary for cohesion, can produce stoicism but also isolation. Emotional resilience is cultivated, yet at the expense of open expression. Long-term service transforms the mind as much as the body, shaping perception, priorities, and personal identity. Yet even amidst suffering, moments of quiet significance emerge. A successful patrol, a repaired bridge, a meal shared in relative comfort all offer proof of competence and contribution. Faith becomes tangible in these moments, reinforcing purpose. Endurance itself is sanctified. The ability to persist despite hardship is a mark of virtue. The crusader learns that heroism is rarely recognized in grand gestures, but is embedded in consistent, disciplined action. This combination of endurance, discipline, and vigilance extends beyond survival to the social and operational networks of the crusader states. Individual perseverance reinforces collective security. Each knight's attention to routine, defense, and logistics strengthens the order as a whole, stabilizing fortresses, protecting pilgrims, and sustaining campaigns. The human system becomes a force multiplier. Disciplined individuals create resilient communities. And yet the constant tension remains. Survival is never guaranteed. Fate, politics, and chance operate beyond the control of even the most disciplined knight. A sudden ambush, political betrayal, or illness can undo months of careful planning. Endurance, while necessary, is insufficient to guarantee safety or success. Life on the frontier of faith and war is a continuous negotiation between discipline, circumstance, and unpredictability. The unresolved thought persists as night falls over the camp. The crusader may endure hunger, disease, fatigue, and fear with remarkable resilience, but even the most disciplined individual is subject to the forces of chance, politics, and time. Can human endurance, no matter how refined, ever be enough to sustain both life and the mission when circumstances beyond one's control intervene? The crusader's life, when viewed from the outside, seems defined by the extraordinary, battles, sieges, and heroic charges. But the truth is quieter, slower, and far more relentless. It is defined not by a single act of bravery, but by decades of survival, labor, and disciplined endurance. The real heroism lies in persistence, the ability to maintain faith, focus, and function under conditions that continually test body, mind, and spirit. By the final years of service, a knight carries both physical and psychological scars. The body shows signs of chronic fatigue. Joints stiffen from long marches, muscles ache from repetitive labor, and minor injuries often leave permanent marks. Disease leaves lingering weaknesses. Yet these